Welcome. Welcome to the first Lunch and Learn event of this year for the Benedictine Institute. We are so happy to see all of you and provide a nice meal for you all while you hopefully also nourish your spirit a little bit with our talk today. I'm Dr. Roger Narlock. I am director of the Benedictine Institute, and you can look forward to 2 more of these throughout the semester. We generally do about 3 of these each semester, as well as lots of other programming. If you didn't see our programming sheets, there's 2 colorful sheets on the front table up there that have all kinds of lists of things that the Benedictine Institute does. Of course, every Friday we have our building community, which is just a social opportunity to partake in some free coffee and donuts and get to know your coworkers. So we welcome you to that as well. There will be, always check the daily bulletin for announcements in regard to what our events are. One in particular we have coming up is, backed by popular demand, the Bingo, Benedict, and Beer event, and this year it will be over at St. Ben's. I have a couple of other more specific announcements at the end, but I'd like to get to introducing our speaker for today, which is Dr. Michael Ruble Key, who is kind of newly here, but not also. Michael was a St. John's grad and a double major in English and theology, and also minored in music during his time here. He then went off to some other prestigious Catholic Midwest university called Notre Dame, and got a doctorate from Notre Dame in systematic theology and specializes in monastic studies. So I remember when he first introduced himself as a faculty member last year, I was like, ooh, monastic studies, I should get him to do one of these. So here we are. We welcome him back to these campuses to teach both in the undergraduate school as well as the graduate school of theology. In undergrad, he teaches primarily Intro to Theology, but he teaches various courses in the graduate school on the rule of Benedict and Benedictine monasticism, traditions within Christian spirituality, as well as the history of Christianity from 1200 to 1900. He and his wife Becca. I didn't ask. Is she a Benny?
She's not a Benny.
Okay. Well, we can't all. Okay. Well, we can't all make perfect choices, I guess. Although I'm sure his wife is perfect. So Michael and his wife Becca have 2 kids, Hannah, age 7, who goes to the St. Joe Lab School, and Caleb, who he describes as the giver of gray hairs in their family because of Caleb's love for sharp objects. So with that, please welcome Michael Ruble Key.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you, friends. It's a delight to be able to be with you today and to reflect with you on some aspects of the Benedictine tradition that are useful for us in developing our capacity to be attentive. So I always console myself with these lunch events because I really worry in preparing that, I'm not going to be able to say anything new. There are going to be monastics in the room, Father Anthony. There's going to be just like, maybe I'm going to say something really foolish. But the great consolation is that you will be fed. And so, like, regardless of what I have to say, I'm going to take solace in that. Well, friends, today we're going to be talking about some aspects of the rule which I think are actually like kind of foundational. Other people might talk about them as sort of introductory. I don't know that there's that much of a difference. We always return to the most important things, don't we? There's never a time when we're done being beginners, and that's actually something that Benedict wrote about a little bit in the rule. So today, I just want to reflect with you on a few aspects of tending to the essentials and what that's like for us, especially in times of transition or upheaval. So, friends, I have to confess that in times of transition or profound upheaval in my own life, I have often entertained the fantasy of running away to a Benedictine monastery. Now, no, this isn't elaborate cosplay. or a time when I made a life decision that my wife didn't know about. This is actually my brother. His name is Simeon Rubel Key. He is a Benedictine monk at the Abbey of at Assumption Abbey in Richardton, North Dakota. But I've often considered, especially since he's like right there, I've thought, especially with my son running around with knives, isn't it easier to maybe have your life ordered to a specific goal by someone outside of it, to pursue this in the relative peace of the monastic enclosure, so I could be free from distractions and the disturbances of everyday life? And this is where Father Anthony violently interrupts me and says, "Ha! That's not the way the Benedictine life is." And in fact, that's what my brother would tell me too, right? This is actually a sort of fantasy, this desire to run to the monastery. It's probably a backhanded compliment, too, to the monastics among us that their life appears well-ordered and easy. But the reality is, of course, far more demanding. To live under a rule, that is, an agreed-upon guide for your life, in community, which means with others who are often very different from you, under an abbot or superior who will not always share your vision of things, will, in fact, be difficult. But this, the Benedictines insist, is good for us, because it's precisely this which can enable us to grow, especially in times of upheaval or change. What places demands upon us also encourages us to refuse complacency, to reject settling, to continue towards our hopes and their fulfillment when the world around us feels unsettled and chaotic. And I was so delighted this morning to receive from the Benedictine Institute this quote by Sister Joan Chittister, which I think describes one of those aspects of the Benedictine vision of life very well. We must seek to discover what spiritual sanctity means for us, so that whatever changes around us does not change our best longings, does not corrupt our best selves. So it's not just that this is sort of like a nice little bromide or a little nugget of wisdom that the Benedictines will throw out at every opportunity. It's actually a historical reality. Like, let me take you back for just a moment to the days of Saint Benedict. Traditionally, Benedict's birth has been put around the year 480, which is about 4 years after Odoacer deposed the Roman Emperor Romulus Augustulus, causing what we now refer to as the fall of the Western Roman Empire. Far from being a place of just sort of undisturbed spiritual growth or being undistracted, Benedict is, in a sense, building this monastic community in the ruins of society around him. Moreover, that political unrest wasn't something that sort of left him alone. It touched his most famous monastery. If you're familiar with the great monastery of Monte Cassino, we know that after Benedict had founded this, probably sometime in the 530s, that within a few decades, the monastery had been completely destroyed, his monks scattered away from it, not to be refounded for centuries. So throughout history, Benedictine monasteries have emerged and endured times of profound unrest, destruction, and change. And I think this is the sort of lived wisdom that invites us to consider what they may have to tell us about putting down roots, enduring, and allowing ourselves to change fruitfully. So today, I want to reflect with you on what this Benedictine tradition, especially as the rule describes it, can offer us in our own personal times of instability and uncertainty. Even for those who do not identify as monastics, perhaps even for those of us who do not identify as Christian, what wisdom can the Benedictine tradition share with us? And I think, to me, what I have discovered in my own experience with the Benedictines and reflecting on the rule of Benedict in both scholarly and spiritual ways is that Benedict's gift primarily can be described as cultivating attention to what is most important. And so today I want to reflect on this style of attention with you, both in terms of what we should pay attention to, as well as how we can pay attention. And so with that, I'd invite us to consider an opening question that you might just sort of like think about for yourself. And those of you who are brave enough to chew your food and then offer your hand, I would appreciate that, but you know what? I just taught a 9-10 class where everyone was like, looking away. So I understand, this is fine. Just think about it for yourself. But to you, what happens in times of stress or uncertainty? What seems to sort of mark your life? What are the patterns that emerge there? And what are the aspects of your life that seem to lose out against the stresses of the moment. Think about that just for a second, and then if anyone's got some thoughts about what life looks like when you're under stress or in a time of transition. You want to shout it out? Yeah.
I think one of the things that loses out is self-care.
Self-care, absolutely. Yeah, this is the time when I stop eating breakfast, lunch, dinner, and then just go for that pint of ice cream at the end of the day, right? Yeah. Yep, that's certainly one. Self-care. Anybody else? Yeah.
I tend to put on if I know there's stress coming, I'll put on this sleep armor and I'll just okay, it's go time. So.
Right. Yeah, and in some senses we need to have that, right? When we're facing things that are difficult, we need to make sure that we're in a place that we can respond appropriately, but it also means then that we're not as open or as vulnerable as we could be to the people around us. Yeah. What else? Yeah, in the back.
I tend to get what my husband calls prickly towards the ones I love.
Absolutely. No, I can identify with that for sure. We get to be a little, our emotions can more easily get the best of us, right? And everything can seem like just something that is keeping me from doing what I got to do, right? You ever have that feeling? It's usually every morning when I'm trying to walk out the door with my kids for school. There's always something, isn't there? Always something. Okay. I want you to just consider that as we keep going, because I think that one of the things that we find is that when we enter times of transition or upheaval or chaos, we often can lose sight of what's most important to us. And in that situation, we want to run away, right? It's the Bruce Springsteen temptation, as I tell my students who have no idea who Bruce Springsteen is. It's this sense that we want to run from our problems and that, in fact, baby, we were born to run. We need to get away from these circumstances and to develop who we are meant to be. But that precisely is the sort of thing that Benedict is going to shut down right away. Running isn't going to solve our problems. What we'll discover if we run from our problems is that usually they have a way of following us. Yeah? And it sound familiar to anybody? So what is Benedict going to tell us as being an antidote in these times of upheaval and change? Well, one of the things that Benedict is going to do is to invite us to listen. Now, friends, we've got this image here, but actually you've got the real thing right behind you. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing? The opening of the Rule of Benedict is a beautiful sort of line that sticks with me. Listen carefully, my child, to the master's instructions and attend to them with the ear of your heart. This is advice from a father who loves you. Welcome it and faithfully put it into practice. Instead of running from our problems, what Benedict is going to invite us to do is to listen, to stay put long enough to find out what's really going on. This is really kind of the whole point of Benedict's vision of the human being. On one level, if we're going to sort of functionally describe what the human is made to do, for Benedict, maybe the most basic way of saying it is the human being was made to listen and to encounter what is real. And we can find that in many ways. It's not just at the beginning of the prologue of Benedict's Rule. We also find it when we think about the promise of obedience, which Benedict describes. Now, obedience to us is a very sort of unfashionable word, but it comes from the Latin audiens, which fundamentally means to listen to, right? It's less giving up sort of any freedom that I might have for another to control me, and more about taking into account the words and actions of others whose decision-making and course of life can't be seen apart from mine. We're all obedient, I would say. We're all obedient to others in our lives. And my wife knows that I am obedient to her in terms of not just sort of doing whatever she tells me to do, though often this is exactly what I do. It is rather I prioritize listening to her because she and her decisions are part of my life. In a sense, even, I'm obedient to my children. I don't want to say that in such a way that you think that I just let them do whatever they want to do, though the knife wielder would say otherwise. What I would invite you to say is that I listen to their wants and their needs. I want them to have a sense that they're being heard. There's a mutual obedience that happens. And when we think about the way that the Benedictine day is structured, it's around these practices of listening. Why do the monks and sisters and nuns go to prayer 7 times a day? It's fundamentally to develop the capacity to listen to God in and through the Psalms and the chant of their brothers and sisters. Why do they spend so much time doing sacred reading or Lectio Divina? It's to develop the capacity to listen to God in and through the words of Scripture or other life experiences. And finally, when we look at the sort of exemplary view of the monk or the sister in the community, the abbot or the superior, the thing that we find most about them, and that's most evident, is that they listen to others. They're not autocrats, ideally. They're not meant to be people who just sort of lord it over. Rather, they listen to the community, and they especially take into account the needs of those who might otherwise fall through the cracks. Benedict singles out the sick, the young, and the elderly as being worthy of the abbot's or the superior's attention. Okay, so in times of upheaval and stress, what ought we to do? Well, Benedict says, don't run from your problems. Stop and listen. Listen. We might say that no matter what circumstances seem to restrict our ability to act or to plan, we can always make the choice to listen with the ear of our heart. That is, to listen in such a way that we can learn and be transformed. But I think that raises a question for us, doesn't it? Listen to what? There's lots of stuff to listen to today. There's many different sources of wisdom, right? Who should I listen to? What should I listen to? What are the things to which I'm paying attention? And first, let me just put that in terms of a question to you. What are the things that must come before all else for you, or that you would prefer nothing whatever to? What are the things that are most valuable to you, the essentials, right? If you were going to list some of the things that were most important to you, what would they be? You could even take time right now to jot a little list down. But maybe we can name some things that you feel comfortable sharing with us. What are some of the most important things to you in your life? What are the essentials? Family, yes, absolutely. Our families are essential to us. What else is important to us? Personal values, like what might some examples of personal values be? Integrity, honesty, yeah, absolutely. What else might be important to us? Friends, cultivating friendships, absolutely. You know who you are by who you are friends with, in a certain sense, right? They help expand us and make us who we are. Anything else? Faith. Yeah. For those of us who have faith especially, we have a sense that there's more to our reality than simply what meets the eye, that there is a caring, loving God at work in our lives. What else? Health, absolutely. If we don't have good health, that takes away something essential from all the other pieces of our life, right? What else? Nature, absolutely. A place where we can go to be quiet, go to listen. So friends, I want us to consider that, if nothing else today, maybe one of the things that you might do is to say, Benedict is inviting me to identify the things that are important to me. Because in his rule, Benedict identifies the most central and essential pieces for his community. And we also have to recognize that by nature, we are not very good listeners. Okay, this is the thing that every person who is married learns very quickly. I thought I was a good listener, but, right? My wife and I dated for a long time, and we were long distance for years, and we had to speak on the phone as a sort of way of being close to each other. Sometimes we'd spend an hour a day on the phone, and we're we got this fighting stuff, this communication stuff down fine. We're going to be just fine. And the first year of marriage really taught us otherwise, right? So listening is not really something that comes naturally to us. I think that's something that we can just sort of observe in our daily lives. Benedict names this reality self-will, propria voluntas, the sense that the way that I usually proceed in life is to see the world as revolving around me and my desires and my priorities and my irritations, right? It might be that this means that we have to think about what others are considering, but most of all, it sort of focuses us in on ourselves. What David Foster Wallace, the great American writer, once described as our default setting is to pay attention only to what is in front of me, and that is myself. So we have to overcome this obstacle of self-will. And Benedict invites us then to recognize that as we sort of free ourselves into listening well, what we're going to find is that we are called to listen to, I would say, at least 5 things, okay? At least 5 things today. We need to be called to listen to first what is most real. What is most real? Much of our lives can kind of go around this sense that the thing that's in front of me is the most important. That's the way that I respond to emails. The thing that's in front of me is most important, especially if I have other more pressing tasks that I don't really want to do. The thing that is in front of me is most important. But really we have to have this sense that oftentimes that's not the case. What is most real is the thing that we are not preferring to anything else. The thing that must come before all else, right? So what is most real? Well, Benedict names it in a couple of phrases if we're talking about what we should prefer to nothing else or to have come before all else. For Benedict, what is real fundamentally is the reality of God, who is embodied in Jesus Christ and who speaks to us through Scripture, our community, and our neighbor. Benedict writes in chapter 4 of the Rule, the love of Christ must come before all else. And in chapter 72, let them prefer nothing whatever to Christ. This is the great animating vision that Benedict has of developing ears to hear the word of God, that which is most real. But I'd say, friends, that even for those who don't share this fundamental perspective with Benedict, there's wisdom to be learned here. This single-hearted devotion to what is real on Benedict's part should raise, at the very least, the question for me, what do I consider real, both intellectually and practically? What comes before all else for me? To what do I prefer nothing? Or maybe to what ought I prefer nothing? What is most real? This is where Benedict places us. The second piece that's tied into this, really, is a recognition of the fact that our bodies and the world around us are real. Someone said self-care earlier as being something that gets lost in times of stress and upheaval. And that's certainly true. I think one of the things that we see, that we sort of like pretend that we're doing in those times is that I'm not someone who needs 3 meals a day or exercise or sleep. In other words, I don't have a body. I don't need that. That's that's fun, but it's not like a real obligation for me to take care of. Notice the way that Benedict prioritizes recognizing our bodily needs. There are, out of 73 chapters in the Rule, 2 full chapters that reflect on the proper amount of food that the monastic ought to consume and the proper amount of drink that the monastic ought to consume as well. And when we read those chapters, what we find is that though Benedict recommends sort of a sparse diet, he's not trying to starve his monks or deprive them of what they need. He doesn't even believe that they ought to be deprived of the good things of life, like wine, which he believes that a small amount of can be consumed every day, for those of you who like your vino. Benedictines, in other words, are not meant to be superheroes without bodily needs, but those who attend to what their bodies actually need. Right? And this is an important difference. Don't we find that in times of stress, we mistake the potato chip for the hearty meat and vegetable that our bodies really need, or the protein that we might desire? We might mistake scrolling endlessly through Twitter or Instagram to be the proper substitute for going about and talking with our family, as I sometimes do, or walking around and enjoying nature, right? So we have to attend to the world around us, to our bodies and to our material needs. And in doing that, what we're going to find is that that's part of being real and attending to what is real. Even when it comes to material property, even though Benedict describes the monastery as being a community that holds everything in common, consideration for weaknesses is the guiding principle he gives for the use of property in the community, right? So our bodies and the material world around us are important. They are part of what is real. We also, I think, in times of stress and upheaval can lose sight of the fact that our communities are real to us. And again, it's focusing in on ourselves that can happen. We get the sense sometimes that in times of great stress, we are islands. But as the great English poet John Donne once wrote, no man is an island. In the busyness of our everyday lives, what we have to do is to enable ourselves to recognize the communities that sustain us, the communities that are part of us. And it's really at the end of the rule of Benedict that he really focuses in on this in a beautiful way. For Benedict, to think of oneself in community is to think of something that makes us more of who we are. A place where we don't have to be in competition or put up these walls to other people, but instead can be who we are to support others and allow them to support us too. And to me, chapter 72, which is the second to last chapter of the rule, describes this so beautifully that I just have to say it all in one go. You can read it if you'd like. But what is the sort of like vision of taking account of our communities? Here's what Benedict writes. Just as there is a wicked zeal of bitterness which separates from God and leads to hell, we might parse this as being leads to profound unhappiness in this life and however that's extended. So too there is a good zeal which separates from evil and leads to God and everlasting life. This then is the good zeal which monks must foster with fervent love. They should each try to be the first to show respect to the other, supporting with the greatest patience one another's weaknesses of body or behavior, and earnestly competing in obedience to one another. No one is to pursue what he judges better for himself, but instead what he judges better for someone else. To their fellow monks they show the pure love of brothers, to God loving fear, to their abbot unfeigned and humble love. If we really recognize our communities for what they can be, that is, the places that make us better together, this is the sort of attitude that we ought to cultivate, Benedict says. And that's not to deny that what we need and want are important too. It's simply to say that I best find those things together with others. These communities I belong to. Their stories can never be fully dissociated from my own. So the final thing that I invite us to think about is we are called to listen to how our work reflects what is real. And I love that we have at these Benedictine Lunch and Learns such a variety of people from different aspects of the university coming together, staff, faculty, other folks coming. Because I think for Benedict, one of the things that we can consider is the fact that the workday is not simply a way to waste time until we start our real lives, no matter what our jobs are, right? The workday is meant to be an important part of our daily life, a place where we can show the care, the concern, and the order that God has for us to the people around us. For Benedict, it's such an important part that he devotes another chapter to it, chapter 49, where he writes, "When the monastics live by the labor of their hands, then they are really monks." We don't want to sort of like skew that one-sidedly, though, right? Because in our culture, we tend to think that our achievements define us. If I'm not what I can do, then what am I, we might ask, right? We often are tempted to reduce ourselves to what we put on our CV, to what we put on our resume, to how nicely our LinkedIn or Indeed accounts look. And what Benedict invites us to consider is that work is done best when it's not simply done to prop myself up. It's done best when it's done for the good of a community, when it's done for the benefit of others. If we can have that in mind, no matter what we're doing, it changes the way our work relates to reality. Okay, with that, I want to ask one more question. Those are the four things that I think Benedict invites us to consider as listening to when it's coming to things that are really real. What is most real? Our bodies and our material realities, our communities, and our work. But let me ask you, what are some of the ways that you prioritize what is most important in your life? And how can we better listen to what is real? So you all had sort of a top 5, right? You all had a top 5. And if you're like me, maybe not everything on that top 5 list gets worked out or treated or applied every day. Maybe I'm some days better at work than I am with my family, or some days I'm better with taking care of little details than I am about taking care of my faith. But what are the ways that you prioritize what's most important? Any takers here? Yeah.
I develop a very simple rule that I feel I can keep up with.
Yeah, absolutely. We have to sort of like impose structure on our days, or our days will impose their structure on us, won't they? Yeah, to have a sense of being intentional with what we do throughout the day. What else? For those of you who have families, is the family dinner hour still a thing? Yeah? And we prioritize coming together at Thanksgiving with people, no matter how obnoxious they are, or sort of like what terrible political views they'll espouse at the table, right? We come together because it's important about that. Think about that question too. Not only what is most important to me, but how do I practice that? And I want to consider with you, in relation to the 4 things that Benedict invites us to listen to in times of upheaval, 4 specific ways that we can better listen to what is real. And the first thing, friends, is making time for silence. Okay? I find that in my classroom, my students are so distracted, and not necessarily in a bad way. They're up to speed on all of the latest sort of events in the world that Twitter is sharing with them, as well as the different things that are happening in their cohort or their channel on Discord. But what they sometimes struggle with is just paying attention to what's in front of them. In fact, that can be the hardest thing for us to do, is to pay attention to the one or the thing that's right in front of me today. And the only way that we can really develop that capacity is to be quiet long enough to hear them, right? So how do we find silence in our lives? Many of us may find that nature is one of those things that gives us silence, that communion with something that's sort of outside of us. Maybe you've got young kids like me, and the only really quiet time of your day is when you're in the car in between coming to work and picking them up from school. That's such precious time, such precious time. But maybe there are other ways in which you're cultivating silence. One of the things that Benedict wants when he's describing this importance of listening is that we can't listen without first being quiet. We can't receive what others want to share with us if we are constantly distracted. What do we need to do in order to cultivate that space for silence? And for each of us, I think that looks different. As you had said earlier, a little rule to the day is the second thing that Benedict invites us to consider. How do we order our days so that they're not simply what the to-do list dictates from us, but that they really reflect what is most important to me? If my work is less important than my family, now there will be times in which I'm working more, but maybe I've let work kind of creep into the time that my family deserves. If God really is an important part of my daily life, how much time do I devote to that? What are the little ways that I consider how being attentive to God and God's word can change me? So when we order our days intentionally, we're able to be freer in responding and tending to the things that are most essential, even when times of chaos overwhelm us. The third thing I'd encourage us to think about is that staying put is really an important thing in order for us to overcome the chaos and upheaval of our times of change. And staying put looks different for different situations. But fundamentally, it's to say, I don't need to be anywhere else but where I am. That's sometimes the hardest thing, isn't it? To admit that this is the place where I'm meant to be, without looking to the left or the right. Right here and right now is enough. The next thing I think that's important is to have boundaries. One of the most beautiful things in the Rule of Benedict comes in chapter 43 of the Rule. And I find this beautiful because I'm a nerd, but you may find it beautiful too. But what does Benedict tell us in chapter 43? On hearing the signal for an hour of the divine office, the monk will immediately set aside what he has in hand and go with utmost speed, yet with gravity and without giving occasion for frivolity, to the oratory, to the place of prayer. Indeed, nothing is to be preferred to the work of God. In other words, friends, what Benedict is describing for us is boundaries. Having boundaries is an essential part of staying clear and focused on what's important. To be able to put work down at the end of the day is an important matter for us if we're attending to our families and other things. To be able to let things have their proper place is a skill that helps us to better attend to what's essential. And then finally, receiving interruptions. This is something that's always kind of a continual call to consideration for me. How do I receive the person who is clamoring for my time? And for Benedict, he frames this in terms of hospitality, really. I'm saying interruptions, but what he's saying is guests. How do you receive guests in your life? Because everyone who comes to you, every opportunity that comes to you is in fact a guest. What does that guest have to teach you? How are we reacting to these opportunities for listening in what is most essential? To conclude, friends, I watch a lot of Disney movies and children's movies because this is just the stage of life that I'm in. But one of the things that I found really helpful was considering How the Grinch Stole Christmas. And the overall goal of How the Grinch Stole Christmas was the enlargement of a heart that was 3 sizes too small, right? What is Benedict's vision of growth? What is the ideal that Benedict has in these times of chaos and upheaval? It's not merely that you are meant to survive being adrift, but actually that you are meant to grow, that you are meant to be more than what you are. How does he frame this? Well, he's not telling us that if you follow the rule, in 90 days you will find instant results. This is something that I think every monk can attest to. Benedict will stress that the rule he's written is for beginners, in fact. But the change that happens actually comes, as Benedict describes it, in the prologue. At the end of the prologue, one of the most indisputable passages that Benedict wrote is this: that as we progress in this way of life and in faith, we shall run on the path of God's commandments, our hearts overflowing with the inexpressible delight of love. The sort of intentional ability to attend to what is essential is available to all of us, even outside the monastery. And so Benedict invites us not only to survive times of chaos, but to thrive in those times, to listen with the ear of our heart. And when we prioritize what is most real, we can be both stable in times of chaos and uncertainty, as well as ever growing in response to the needs of the moment. With that, my last question to you is this. You might consider for yourself then, what seems most useful from Benedict's vision of life? What of those 4 priorities might I need to attend to a little bit better? What are those strategies that Benedict shares with us might I be able to put into use into my life? And what might be harder for me to integrate? With that, I'm going to let you mercifully be done with me speaking. If there are any questions, you can share them now. So, thank you, friends. Yeah.
Question, and I'm thinking of how to integrate contemporary psychology into what Benedictine is teaching us. Benedict is teaching us. That's better, sorry. And I think one of the things when you talk about attending to what is really real, is also paying attention to the narratives and the stories that we're telling ourselves.
Yeah.
We do all the time about what is going on around us, and how as we pay attention to the story, we might want to check whether it's accurate, it's real, it's goodly, it's loving, it's just about that.
Oh, absolutely. That's such a great insight. And I think that psychology has a lot to share with the wisdom that Benedict has. And in fact, Benedict draws on a tradition of monastic psychology. In chapter 73, he points people to reading the works of St. John Cassian, who describes the ways in which our thoughts interact with our behavior, right? And how there are false thoughts that start within us that lead to false actions. So being able and aware of where our thoughts begin, how they're ordered, what they tend to produce in us, makes us more realistic. It helps us to attend to what is real, because oftentimes what Cassian will note is that our sort of desire to make the world about me and my desires, or the things that irritate me, can be pretty subtle. We have to kind of dig around that in order to come to what is real. Yeah, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. Any other thoughts or questions? That's great. Friends, at the very least, you had a good lunch, but thank you for your time, and I appreciate being able to share this with you.
Thank you so much, Michael. Again, especially in these times, it's wonderful to draw our attention back to what matters. And along that line, rather than announce a whole bunch of events we have coming up for the Benedictine Institute, again, be mindful of your daily bulletin to see the times and locations of those things. I want to highlight a couple of things that we have, a couple of opportunities that we have for you that dovetail nicely with Michael's talk in terms of helping us to make time for and to remember what matters, what's meaningful. Every Tuesday At the Elkowen Library, we have Lexio in the library for anybody who would like to participate. And the same thing, and that's at 12:30 every Tuesday. You can follow the signs. There'll be signs up in the library. And same thing at Clemens Library at St. Ben's, 12:30 every Thursday. And either somebody from the Benedictine Institute staff or one of the monastic members will be leading you through group Lectio Divina. The other is a program we started during the pandemic when we couldn't do any of this in-person stuff, but yet we wanted people to keep focused on what matters. And so we started our Listen program, which we send out, which Michael quoted today, very timely or very last minute, depending on how you want to put it. The quote that came out today, we send out if you can sign up, go to our website and go under the Listen program, and you can add your name to an email list, and you'll receive 3 times a week an email from the Benedictine Institute that will have some short, like 1-sentence quote to help us remember what's important. And all of these quotes, they come from a variety of different sources. Not all of them are Benedictine, not all of them are Christian, but they all resonate with a Benedictine kind of message. We have over 1,200 people signed up that receive these emails, and so you can be the 1,201st if you run and do that right afterwards. It's modeled after monastics 3 times a day meet together to pray, to bring their attention back to what's important. We didn't want to subject your inboxes to 3 of these a day, so we figured 3 a week would probably be a good moderate amount. With that, 2 quick announcements, and I see Jesse has stepped out, but I just want to note a couple of changes in our staffing. We now have Jessie Bazan in the Benedictine Institute, who's helping to do some of our work, and she was the one who greeted you at the door most likely, but she had to step out for a phone call. And then we have Catherine Rupp, who serves as department coordinator for many different entities on this campus, as a number of you do, lots of different hats. She is currently on vacation right now, so, but if you see emails from Catherine Rupp, or there's Jesse wave, or from Jessie Bazan, they are also, again, helping to do what we do and to help bring our communities together for the Benedictine Institute. So thank you all again for joining us, and have a wonderful rest of the week.